Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop news and reviews and design podcast. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the effervescent Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, welcome to Monday-ishness.
Thank you. I am effervescent in the way that a kid is after they've had a lot of sugar and they could crash at any moment because I got my shingles vaccine on Saturday. And this was just phase one. Those who know, there's a phase two that hits you even harder, apparently. Phase one was no joke. I'm still getting over it, but I hear it's a lot better than getting shingles. So those of you who are 50 and older, plan for your shingles vaccine and just give yourself some time to recover.
Yeah, already had mine, got my flu shot, and then fell off a ladder this weekend. That was fun. Washing windows. My wife's like, don't do that without me holding the ladder. I'm like, the ladder's fine. And then and it was a small ladder, so I just landed on my feet.
But you didn't Clark Griswold it?
Well, my wife was watching out the window as I was there. And so she just saw me go over. And I thought either she's had a heart attack or she's really mad. And I didn't know which. And I looked up and she was just giving me the glare.
I know a basketball player who would tell me that whenever he got hurt, he was thinking, my mom's watching and I got to get up as quickly as I can, unless it's such a vital situation where I got to fake being hurt so that we get a call. But he was like, unless I have to milk it for a call, I will get up as soon as I can, no matter how much it hurts, because my mom will be freaking out.
Yeah, these things are important. These things play into our games even, apparently. And hey, speaking of games, why don't we talk about some games? Taking questions from our listeners. We've got a ton of listeners out there who write into us, and we thank you for doing that. And so we're going to get to a couple of them this week. One of them is Tony Robertson, coming to us via YouTube, who asks, regarding campaign guides, what are you guys' thoughts on how much a setting should change game mechanics? I'm playing in a homebrew Dark Sun game, and Goodberry was taken out, and Create Water was limited. As a player, I like it because it reinforces how this world is different, but it seems to take more effort to get group buy-in. Absolutely. Yep. And for me, this goes right to the heart of what we talked about last week with the gods. Individual DMs and groups can change their games in any way they want. And they can change the quote unquote expected setting that comes with a game. As long as everyone's on the same page in your group, and if everyone's happy and they're having fun, change it away. But your group is just 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of millions of players involved in our hobby.
Yeah.
So you have to account for a lot of player types and a lot of player desires. So I have a restricted experience, but some experience. And what I found is if something goes into the main rules, including the setting that's implied by those rules, there is an expectation that those will be available regardless of setting. They're not a suggestion to players or GMs. They are the God's gospel truth. So a significant portion of the player base will push back when you try to make a setting that changes those rules, unless you're changing it by addition instead of removal.
Yeah.
Thought so far?
Yeah, for sure. You're right. When you add things, people are totally chill. When you remove it, people get kind of bothered. But I would think this is a conversation. If you're going to DM with this group for a while, like this is your group, this is your gang that you play with, you need to have these conversations. You will only be healthier for making it through these conversations. That the world does not owe you Goodberry. And if your life and satisfaction depends on Goodberry, you're probably playing wrong. You don't have to say those words, but to get that sort of understanding of we're not here for Goodberry interactions, right? We're here for the larger play. And so when we all want to play a game that has a big component of survival and that is supposed to be harsh and difficult to live in, endless water and endless food and endless healing is a problem. And so we need to remove that from the game. And that shouldn't be, I mean, it can be initially difficult to grasp, but we want to get to where it isn't hard to grasp and where the players can buy off on that. And that is both the DM getting better at explaining, selling that concept, explaining why we're doing this, and the players getting better at understanding that and being okay to like shed that which they're so used to, right? And that's a good thing. You want to go down that path with your group.
Yeah. I agree with everything you just said. Part of the issue is the breadth and depth of the rules that there are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to have that conversation. And I'll be on the same page and say, in these situations, this is how we're going to handle it. However, how long does that conversation need to be? Can be detrimental to a game. Yes, you have a session 0. Yes, you do those things. But then it's like, well, what about this? Okay. And then, a new book comes out. Now we have to sit down and have another 3-hour conversation about what we can and can't have. And I think that communication is important in any game for any reason. I totally agree with that. I think there comes a point where the payment that you have to make to get that conversation is not worth paying for what people want out of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, my group knows me fairly well.
Yeah.
And when we ran, for example, Tomb of Annihilation, something that comes up often is if you have a ranger who has this as their favorite terrain, they can't get lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And early on, I'd taken a poll before I started the campaign. Do you want to like really do survival type stuff? And they were like, no. Really, it was like almost unanimous. Like, I don't want to track rations and worry about getting hungry. I don't want throat leeches. I don't want any of that kind of stuff. It's like, okay. So, but the player still came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking of making a ranger with this favored terrain of, jungle or whatever it is. Is that going to be a problem? Right. And they asked me, and I thought about it and I said, no, because you guys don't want this to be in your game. So actually it's great. You're just making it so we're not going to get lost. And that's actually what you guys want. So we're all good. But he checked with me, right? Because he knew that this was an important conversation to have. And that's great, right? If they had the opposite said, yeah, we want to have like tracking our rations and whether food runs out and are we poisoned by the water, then I probably would have said, well, let's change that benefit, right? In some way so that you can get lost because that's a part of the experience you actually say you want.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm just, it's a price to pay. And you have to weigh that price versus what the benefit you get out of it. I mean, I think of games I've run in public for strangers where we'll sit down to play and we get going and one character says, all right, I move here and now I'm flanking, so I have advantage. And I'm like, well, that's an optional rule that we're not using. And they got up and left. and so that's fine. And I'm actually okay with that because that kind of player might not have been the best for the table I was playing, running at. But there is that mindset out there of this is the game I want to play.
Right. Sure.
And I am going to play this game or I will not play.
Yeah.
And
not
so that's
all DMs feel like they can have conversations with their players. I've heard a lot of examples from players. There was a Winter Fantasy where someone talked a lot about their Ravenloft campaign and their DM just couldn't have these kinds of conversations with them. And so various players would abuse the game and the system. And so the tone could never be there. And yeah, you're right. For some groups, it is there. This is a giant hill to climb. Yeah.
I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss any of my points. There is this thing about a self-selecting audience, right? When the rules come out, if players are functioning members of society, they will read the rules and they will say, I like this game or not for me.
Yeah.
And those who like the game will play the game and those who don't like the game will go find another game. And so when you change those rules that you create, what you're saying is you, player, have chosen this game to love, and now I'm going to make it a different game that you might not love. And so that's not an excuse. It's not a reason to change or not to change, but it's just something in interpersonal relationships and large segments of people making choices that changing things triggers, right? It triggers that.
I mean, Dark Sun is that, right? Dark Sun is take everything you're used to and we're going to flip it upside down, right? The elves are not in tree villages and the most nobly uppity people ever. Nope, they are scoundrels and they run across the desert, right? And everything on, right? The halflings are cannibals. I mean, we're just changing everything, and so that is only fun if you want to buy into that. Otherwise, it's gonna be a tough ride. And I've met a lot of people, as much as I love Dark Sun, I've met a lot of people who say, yeah, that setting's not for me. I don't like anything about it, or I don't like these 5 things or whatever.
Yeah. And it's funny because a message came in right before we started recording that really sums this up. So I wanted to say thank you to the MP Gossage via YouTube. I like the idea of settings putting certain constraints on the game to change how it feels, but talking as a GM of public games, I have often seen the opposite. People will hunt through setting books for custom feats, species, spells, subclasses, and then add them to their character, giving a real mishmash of characters who appear together with no coherence. So we have the human fighter with the Dampier wall-running rogue with the Warforged moon druid called Grimlock. And yes, that is a thing, and it is sometimes uncomfortable to have those sorts of conversations for a very short, like one-shot adventure.
I mean, I find it interesting that the 2024 5e character building process does not speak more to that idea of thinking through your character concept. It has the steps and how you go through them are kind of these process steps, but they aren't. They don't really pull out and do a holistic thing around it. They'll address that a little bit within steps, but it leads to, I think, to that kind of disjointed thinking, or it can.
Well, I like that. I like that they started with class, but I also understand why that would be the last thing you would want to start with. But in order to get a system in place that really forces a player to think through those steps, it forces the player to think through those steps who might not want to think through those steps.
True.
And as you well know, to make a sort of life cycle character creation sort of thing takes a lot of work, a lot of word count, a lot of space that may not serve the whole of the audience for the game best. I would love to see a supplement that was out there for like maybe new players or players that wanted to say, here is a life cycle character building scheme that you can employ for your games.
But it's tough. I mean, Wildmount kind of has that to some extent. Xanathar's has another sort of version of it. But when you put it out in these little spots, it's very different than, 13th Age, which says, hey, first question, what's your one unique thing, right? Or I don't know if it's the first question, but it's pretty early on, right? And skills, tell me what you did. Okay, that'll decide when you get bonuses, because it's just and those kinds of things are very holistic. They're not this little process, little step. They are all-encompassing vision of your character kind of thing. Anyway, it's interesting. Not to get too sidetracked, but that is a fantastic question around this concept of campaign limits. Do you see what would you, and let's say someone came to you and said, hey, Shawn, we want to write a campaign setting. Should we change these game mechanics to support it?
So we change the base rules to support it? Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But what you're doing is you are then limiting your audience quite a bit, which is fine. It's just fine to do, but you just have to be aware of that's what you're doing. And working on 2 campaign settings right now, I completely understand that question. And you just have to say who's our audience for this and move forward based on that. Second question comes to us via email, surprisingly. And we don't say this a lot, but you can email us if you so choose at masteringdnd@gmail.com. And this email comes to us from Will Doyle, the greatest adventure writer with his partner Stacy as a team going right now.
Yeah.
Say it straight up.
No, it's true. It's true. It hurts me because I want to be as good as they are.
Yeah.
But it also pleases me because I get to read their work and get inspired
Mm-hmm.
by it. So it's really good. It's overall a win. They can keep doing what they do as well as they do it.
Exactly. And so Will asked this, and I took this question in steps. So here we go. In a recent episode, while talking through the origins of the D&D Open, you stressed that D&D has always been a cooperative game. This touched on a pet theory of mine. Mm-hmm. While D&D is a cooperative game, its original designers attempted to bake conflict at the table into its rules. And my answer, just to be clear, when I said cooperative game, I was talking capital C cooperative, as opposed to, tennis or wrestling or
board games,
like poker, or some game where the goals of the players are diametrically opposed to each other. D&D does not do that. It could do that, but it doesn't. So let's continue. Look at the old first edition classes. Why offer a thief alongside a paladin class if not to sow discord? Similarly, the first edition barbarian had a hatred of magic hardwired into its class features, which put it at odds with the wizard. All right. So I have things to say, but I'm going to let Teos step in here if he so chooses.
Well, I mean, yeah. I find this I'm going to give it to you. I love this question. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm still thinking them. So go ahead. What do you think?
So I too love this thought, and it's something that I've thought about before. I've talked about this tension. That stories thrive on tension, and games too thrive on tension. But I think the tension there is more of a happy or maybe an unhappy coincidence rather than the designers making a deliberate choice. I think the choices of the thief and the paladin and the barbarian hating magic and so therefore not liking wizards really goes back to the historical and fictional inspirations of D&D. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, right? They were roguish sorts who were in trouble with wizards, so they disliked wizards. You have Conan, right? You have real life people, Saladin. You have the Arthurian Knights. These are all inspirations that they drew upon to make the classes. So I think that sort of tension came from the cool and interesting and fun stories that inspired D&D rather than a deliberate attempt to say, okay, we are going to make sure the party hates each other or are always at odds.
Okay, I think that, so I've been reading the Playing at the World second edition by John Peterson. And if I look at kind of what they're discussing, there's some really fascinating things in the history of pre-original Dungeons and Dragons, where you have these Bronstein games that are going on where people adopt roles, right? And so that's kind of like before there was a word role playing, before that existed as a term, they are taking on roles and playing these scenarios out that are a massive change from wargaming, right? And Dave Arneson's group starts running their Blackmoor campaign using the chainmail rules and sort of modifying them in kind of non-written down ways, but they're sort of playing at it. And one of the things that he does is this idea of like classes, people are leveling, and they're playing the various classes with sort of more meat to them depending on how they're leveling, which Gygax then refines. And so it's a little bit of that adopting a role. But I think where the industry was, where the concepts were less about let's create this antagonism and more a desire to root something as an entity. So saying that a barbarian hates magic was a way of like going, aha, I've declared something that you can hang on to. It wasn't about creating tension with the wizard. It was about giving you something that you could claim as your own, and that would be like exciting to you, right? And definitive for you. Same thing with rogues. I don't think the concept was you will steal from your party. So that boy did that happen. It drove me up the wall in my games back then. But it was this idea of defining who you are, right, and capturing that concept well.
Yeah, and the one place I go to also try to answer this question are adventures. And the published adventures, did they highlight or promote or bring to the forefront this inter-party tension? And they really didn't.
No.
It was more just go into the dungeon, fight the bad guys, get the treasure, and then leave.
They might reward the paladin with a holy sword or the rogue with a chest to deal with, but that's more about letting your role shine. And what I would also say is that if you look at what happened at the table, like when I talk about those problems with the rogue or the whatever, like I got a magic sword, my half orc got one, and then somehow the rogue convinced the DM that they could pickpockets it out of me, right? And I lost my sword, but I didn't know it was who had taken it. That kind of tension destroyed our game and led to us starting a new campaign. If you deliberately wanted this, you would have allowed for a way for this to work. And there was nothing there, right? Nothing adjudicated this or encouraged it or rewarded it or corrected it or spoke to it. It was just, in fact, it destroyed the game when you did these things.
Yeah, it often did. So there may have been intent, but if there was intent, it wasn't clear through the rules that were in front of us or the adventures that were in front of us. Continuing on with Will's question, the classic alignment system offered ways for characters to naturally oppose each other in the same group. Indeed, the system even offered secret languages so conspirators who shared the same alignment could converse in private at the table. I'm sure the rules never specified this as their intent, and over time these oddities were mostly ironed out. Modern games are certainly geared around strong party cohesion, but it's something I always thought was present back when I first started playing. And I agree that there was, because as Teos said, people who've played since AD&D days or even earlier talk all the time about the rogue/thief character doing these things, or the paladin refusing to do what the rest of the party wanted because it wasn't the quote right thing to do, and all of that. But I often talk about that tension between a tabletop role-playing game as a game system versus an engine for creating stories. And this is just another one of those threads on ludonarrative dissonance. Stories love conflict, even when that conflict is between antagonists. And cooperative games do not handle that well in the rules. Think about a football team. If one of the players decides, well, I'm actually going to go play for the other team now, and the offensive lineman turns around to tackle the quarterback, that doesn't do much for the game as a game,
right?
And we do see. I'm going to talk about that later.
You don't want to introduce a traitor mechanic in American football?
Depending on the team, I think there might already be some. But anyway, this sporting moment brought to you by Mike Shea. Did you have any thoughts on? For me, the alignment question is the same thing as the class question.
I again,
it was there.
Yeah, I again think that this was an attempt to bring verisimilitude to the world, to create an engine for play rather than one for conflict. It was about this older, unrefined view of, well, how do we get people to care about their characters? Well, we give them a thing to these things that they have, right? And you're a member of this, you're a member of this class, you're a member of this alignment, and you're a member of this race or species. You've got these things, and now you care about those things, so you'll talk about them and do them and dig into them, and they're your role in your character, and that's great. Not because you'll fight other people, but because you'll be defined by them. And I think what's happened over time is things like alignment have petered out because they're not the best tool for that, right? And unless the whole system supports it, it's kind of just getting in the way of a lot of play, as we've talked about before. And that's true of a lot of these other things too. These things that create conflict are not the best ways to, they're better ways for you to understand your character. And so modern games try to go in those directions rather than in these, because we've learned better ways to give you identity and tell stories, and avoid conflict. But I think that's less the issue than just having good, fun play.
Yeah. We'll bring Will's question home here with, if my theory is correct, what was the design intent here? I wonder if the original designers saw such conflict as a tactical challenge. A lot of older style design tests the player's ability to cooperate at the table, as well as their character skills. Perhaps this was an attempt to add a sort of puzzle-like element to the roleplay itself. What do you think? And as a wider question, do you see conflict within the party as something that can ever be encouraged? After all, conflict is the main driver of story, and we're not short of great examples like Boromir and Raistlin, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, those are great examples of stories and how stories use conflict, especially conflict between between protagonists. But in a story, there's one player, the writer.
Yeah.
And the writer can balance that to make it work. And the reader can step back and enjoy that conflict, hopefully carefully crafted by a talented writer. In a TTRPG, there are a lot of players. So to compare a story's protagonist conflict to a TTRPG's conflict between protagonists, you have to look to see if there is a rule that takes the part of the writer who is able to balance that to make it a conflict that is worthy of a story and that actually moves the story forward, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I for sure have had times when I've tried to make a character that was like a Raistlin type or something that would have this, I'm going to be evil. And what I've found is it basically never works unless you make it really clear to the other players, and you will win me over. Let's play that out, right? I have this dark side to me that you can fix. Then it becomes a fun thing as we all know that this is going on and you help me sort it out and we role play through that together. That's fun. But you have to break a little bit of that wall off to say, hey guys, I'm not going to be a problem at the table. Right? Like if you think of actually what Raistlin does, like I'm just going to leave for various sessions and leave you without a wizard because I don't care about you is totally not cool and would not work in an actual game. Makes for a great story because, as you said, the novel party of one makes it work through the author. But in actual play, you have to be very careful about those things. And it takes a level of maturity and conversation, understanding each and everybody to it all pull that off, which is why the game doesn't give you that. I mean, it really it doesn't go to that level, right? It never says to you, hey, a cool character concept is to be, allied with the dark forces against the rest of your party for personal gain.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. And as you said, it can be fun if everybody buys in. And if you understand ahead of time, because there's nothing more obnoxious than that heel turn, to use a professional wrestling phrase, right? That heel turn that catches everyone off guard, because as the viewer, it can be fun. As what was the actor who played the Tiamat cleric who turned on the party and his character ended up in Descent into Avernus. I just lost him.
Joe Manganiello.
Joe Manganiello's character did that turn to get the Eye of Vecna, the Hand of Vecna, or whatever.
And he's a guest on the show, which makes it work a lot better, right? It's not a player suddenly going to
and
that
so
level.
as a viewer, we can be shocked and we didn't. Look what he. And as a player who's just
the players do shock each other with some things during those stories, at least going by like the animated series that I've watched. But they're again within those bounds of we all know we're playing a game together. We all trust each other to not actually, cause the downfall of each other in this way, right? We're doing this for fun and for story, and we're all being checking in with each other, that kind of thing.
And the other thing that we can think about is actually adding mechanics or having mechanics baked into the game that account for this sort of conflict. You think of a game like Paranoia. The Paranoia understands that the characters are trying to throw each other under the bus and gain the accolades of friend computer. But you have 6 clones, I think 6 clones that are just waiting. So when somebody zaps you with the Zap-O-Matic ray gun and pretends it's an accident, the next clone comes right up and onward the story goes. Board games have done this, right? With the trader mechanic of Dead of Winter. It's like you may be trying to hoard all the food, which you still want to win, but you're going to win. You don't win unless you have more food than anyone else, which can throw the whole party out. Right. Exactly.
And Knights Like Agents, for example, does things where, not only do you have another PC at the table that you're close to, but you have some that you're opposed to, right? Because of that idea that spies do have these sort of like, issues with each other. And it captures that, but it does so around, but you still have a mission to do together, right? And you must accomplish that mission. But that tension can be sort of interesting play at times.
Yeah. Great question, Will. Thank you for it. And thanks for letting us ramble on a bit there. Now let's get to our news and commentary, starting with previews of the Dungeon Master's Guide. They've begun on the D&D YouTube channel. And on October 1st, those previews have released. What does the first video talk about?
Well, it starts with my least favorite and very 2024 title, Everything You Need to Know. And don't get me, I could spend a half hour just talking about why I hate that title. But that aside, we all know why they used it. And it gives you the general approach and content of the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is to create a more useful book based on the lessons learned across 10 years. Perkins talks about indispensable advice for creating and running games. That was their focus for this book. This led to restructuring the book to be more intuitive, adding more timeless and always useful material rather than read a bit of lore once and you'll never want to open this book again. The concept was that you would go back to this book. It would have tools and tips and things like that.
So what are in the first 3 chapters?
So running a game is the first chapter. It's focused on achieving fun games. Lessons include how-tos that are useful to learn, like invisible railroads to guide play, but without being too confining. Interaction and exploration gets sections, though they are shorter than combat, they said. James Wyatt answered a lot of parts in the video as well, and he said he added a new section on overland travel, thinking through the stages of a journey as a narrative with obstacles to overcome. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Chapter 3 is the DM Toolbox, which covers situational knowledge like traps, siege weapons, poisons, curses, hazards, including a new one called Fireball Fungus. So they did this, organizing it alphabetically by topic, because I guess they felt like in the previous DMG, sort of all this sort of stuff was all over the place, and you didn't know where to turn to find it. So they've put this all in one place and organized alphabetically. And
awesome.
then we get
they
to
also said,
Yeah.
They also said they were going to get 5 short sample adventures included along with that Greyhawk setting. This approach is directed for home games where you don't necessarily need to create a polished vinyl product, which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
The adventures, though, aren't long. They're half-page adventures with a format meant to be one that DMs could emulate using their home game outlines. So they have level 1, 2, and 3 adventures, and then some higher level adventures. What did you think about that?
I think it's a very good strategy. It may not be what experienced folks think they want up front, but I think, I'd like to see how Perkins and Wyatt think you should approach an adventure, right? Like, I think the game should teach that. There is a problem between saying, here's your DMG, now here's your starter set or your first hardback adventure. Oh, that's what an adventure is, right? Like, and you figure out what you want to do in your home table. And so I think that this idea of like giving you the kind of framework that you would probably more truthfully use and generate on your own is a better way to teach how to create adventures, right? Like if you're doing things at the table, you just need an outline and you're going to play off of that. So it's a good goal. I look forward to seeing what the actual execution is, but I like the concept.
And so they have advice and tables and so on for those adventures that you could reuse over and over again, depending on the needs that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have a campaign chapter, but that's now later in the book to help build on things that they've talked about earlier in the book. Perkins says that this is a complete campaign setting using Greyhawk as an example. And he and James Wyatt discuss going back to the original folio, which had fewer pages and was more of an outline than what Teos and I went through in great detail before. So they said it's complete, but it's also a skeleton.
What a great quote. He says it's complete like 3 times, Perkins does. And I kind of laughed each time because like, is it complete though? But he made a big deal of, it's the first time that there's been a setting in a DMG. And I'm like, well, I kind of remember a couple of examples of sort of settings, including Nentir Vale, maybe arguably, but okay, but I get the goal here. And
but
again,
that wasn't complete, Teos. That was just a skeleton.
No, it was yeah, those were just, wait a minute. It's fine. I mean, there's always a little marketing spin. And honestly, I thought all of these videos, Perkins looks like the last place he'd like to be is recording a video. So I feel for him. And maybe I'm reading him wrong. Both he and Wyatt talk about this idea of the goal. And to me, it sounds really good, right? Start with the city of Greyhawk as an example of an urban campaign hub and kind of your home base, your initial place from which you will radiate outward. And so we'll get an example of urban world and the city of Greyhawk and that kind of thing. And then we'll name various threats such as Ayuz or Elemental Evil or Tiamat. Those are 3 of the ones they named. And that the starter adventures can to some degree link to these, they suggested, Wyatt did. And then the map is of the city of Greyhawk on one side, wilderness on the other. And from this hub, you can go out to nearby interest areas, which are fleshed out to some extent than the larger world. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's going to be the goal here, is getting you started with how you can frame a campaign and a world. So complete from the perspective of that goal, perhaps? I mean, I don't think you're getting a Greyhawk campaign setting, but at least maybe the starter set to one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We also get a glossary of lore that's alphabetical, so you can look up things as you need them. And then Chris talks about the Bastion system and how it's been refined a bit since the Unearthed Arcana article that presented the Bastion system for the first time. What does Chris say about the Bastion system?
Yeah, they made a big deal of like, oh, you'll be so surprised about how much it's changed since the UA. And all I could think was, really? But at this high level video, they say that you have to be 5th level to get PCs, just as we saw in the UA. It'll grow with the PCs over time. And that this is a nice activity away from the main game and a way players can feel more like DMs directing their Bastion. I thought everything they said in this video was cool. Like, they seem to recognize the idea you've got to be able to do something with it while you're adventuring, and that you want to put in player creativity into it and all these kinds of things. Everything at the high level sounded to me fantastic, but I had a lot of caution around it. Hearing that, everything sounded great, but I mean, I didn't love the UA, so we'll see how it gets better over time, or what we actually end up with.
I went back and reread our Acquisitions Incorporated what do you call them?
Franchise rules.
Franchises. And I also went back and looked for something that James and Tricasso made for the Oracle of War campaign, because you could have salvage bases that you could build over time as you went into the Mournland, salvaged things and brought it back. And I went back and it had been taken down from the DM's Guild. And not trying to start any conspiracy theories here, but I was like, I was going to point people to that.
So, well, it was removed in theory because a while back, because they had stopped the program. So the idea was that you shouldn't find the rules because you're not supposed to make more salvage adventures and missions. But yes, those rules actually look a lot like Bastions, right?
I would say so. So I was going to try to compare the two, but I alas can't.
Well, I can send you a copy, but
but yeah, okay. I will at some point.
Yeah.
And then we talk about the art, how there is more art, and some of the art has been revised for magic items. The magic items from the 80s cartoons are available.
Those are really strong.
Somebody says they're really strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll leave that at that. There are some changes, like the flame tongue no longer needs to be a sword. Magic item crafting is in the player's handbook, but it's limited in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It will cover more than just scrolls and potions. We get more description of the multiverse
and what it means to
D&D.
There's one thing that I thought was really interesting. So they said, you're going to have additional crafting. What the word that never came up was downtime. So as far as I can tell, downtime seems to be gone from 2024, which I find fascinating.
Interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on that as the book comes out. We get more description of the multiverse. There are tracking sheets provided they will be available for download to help a DM track campaign and game information. They are decorated with baby monsters. And then Chris ends the video by saying that he is grateful for the time that he spent with 2014 and the opportunity to make these new core books a better experience.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later, a whole Bastions video came out. I did not see this video, so you're going to have to help me here.
It walks through that new system. Honestly, it sounded a lot like the Unearthed Arcana version, but maybe that's me having a bias, just not expecting it to be vastly different given how design works. But a nice part that they covered is the vision that this gives PCs something to define, that it can help players think and act like DMs in designing their Bastion. And that led to another listener question, Shawn.
All right, I will read this listener question from the Mathemagician via our Patreon Discord. I just watched the D&D video on Bastions. In the video, they made a big point about how interacting with them is off limits for the Dungeon Master, and how these upgrades just happen at various levels. Why are we putting things in the DMG that are off limits for the DMs? I typically think of the DMG as off limits for players. I'd be quite surprised to see my players sit down at the table, crack open the DMG, and say, I'm ready to play. So what do you have to say about that?
Well,
Mr.
I think they
Abadia?
got a little carried away on the video about this. I think that, they're sometimes, they're told to be marketing people when they're design people, right? Is the problem with some of these videos. And so I think they were maybe being a little over emphatic on it. I think what they mean is that the players get to drive choosing these Bastion options. The DM's still administering the rules for Bastions, deciding when to introduce them, adjudicating all the DM side events around Bastions, and so on. Yeah, the players do have to use the DMG rules, but why are they in the DMG? I have two answers for you. See what you think, Shawn. Number one, practical. There isn't space in the player's handbook.
Yep, I would agree there.
Number two, having Bastions in the DMG gives it something new, so you will want to buy it too. Maybe even players will want to buy it. You've got weapon masteries in the player's handbook, and you've got Bastions in the DMG. Those are your two new things that are supposed to drag you into buying a new book that you maybe otherwise didn't want to get. And that's why they're in the DMG.
I cannot argue there. And if you're interested in the Unearthed Arcana Bastions, Teos did a beautiful YouTube video that discussed that, and there's a link in our show notes, or you could just go to alphastream.org, I am sure, and do a little search for Bastions.
Thank you, sir.
More news. The D&D licensed products just keep on coming. EN World had a nice little article gathering recent products like the Dungeons and Dragons Pocket Expert, a Random House book that gathered lore and knowledge, such as the number of tentacles a mind flayer has and what the Forgotten Realms are. For only $8 this week, you can become a Pocket Expert on Dungeons and Dragons. WizKids, you like putting tabs in your books. WizKids had you covered there. I don't either. With the 2024 Player's Handbook and 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide book tabs to keep track of the different locations for things in your books. They are $10 each. And do you want some acrylic dice? Clear acrylic dice with beholders inside?
Yeah.
Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you do, I've got news for you. You can get them from FanRoll, releasing in November for $25.
Well, that could be fun. They look nice in the picture that I saw. Yeah, and thanks to Ian World for pulling this all together in one nice place. Ian World, I feel like has had really, really nice coverage of late.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of strange coverage, I am not up to date on this story, but Teos, I want to give the quick and dirty version of this amazing tale of the Commander Rules Committee for Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, this has been really fascinating. Last week, as we were recording, I saw something about the Commander Rules Committee, and we're talking about Magic the Gathering's Commander format of playing cards with Magic the Gathering cards. This committee quit after internet death threats. So on the surface, I was like, oh, this is yet another sad tale of internet hatred. It's so terrible. And there is that, but there's much more. So Commander is this format of Magic the Gathering. You get a leader card, you build a larger deck than usual around it, and it leads to kind of casual or multiplayer games. Wizards doesn't really manage the format. It started as a fan-popularized format, and the rules and lists of banned cards has been managed by this independent Commander Rules Committee. So they look at the card releases and might go like, this card's too much of a problem. Let's actually ban this, or let's clarify how it works, or whatever. And Wizards, of course, does make money off of Commander, right? All those cards are cards you buy from them through the various normal channels. It's increasingly important as Wizards launches specific products exclusively for the Commander format, including rare and special art versions for Commander. The RC group, this rules committee, normally takes a light hand, following social norms, accepted discussion to ban excessively popular cards. They might have been banning a card every couple of years. Well, last week or 2 weeks ago, they simultaneously banned 4 cards. And those cards were expensive and recently used by Wizards of the Coast as the kind of chase rares to motivate you purchasing major products. The result was a dramatic drop in the value of these cards, leading to huge backlash against this rules committee, including harassment and threats, which were apparently very, very serious. And so one of the Commander Advisory Group former members said they were told by multiple people inside Wizards of the Coast that Wizards had told RC, please don't do this ban. Someone else went and looked into what is kind of the business impact of this ban they did. And the thing is here, on one hand, you have the RC trying to do what they kind of should do to say, hey, these cards you are putting out there, Wizards, they're just breaking Commander format, so let's ban them, right? But this video estimated, a YouTube video estimated the financial impact to be between $100 and $150 million in the drop of the value of these cards. So literally, if you went out and bought this card, you lost a huge amount of money when then this rules committee banned them. So after all of these death threats, the RC has basically disbanded, said we're done with this. We're not going to exist anymore. We can't handle these death threats and so on. Handed control over to Wizards, and now Wizards will be the group that decides what cards work and don't work for the Commander play format, right? No more independent voice out there. And I think it's a fascinating story because, this is a situation where an outside group could impose arguably necessary control on how the game should work, but there could be actually a financial impact from it. And there's some aspects that are true of, I think, D&D or other RPG communities where this can be true as well, right? Organized play or other situations where maybe the financial stakes aren't close to the same, but there are parts of the game of D&D or of other RPGs that are really in the hands of other non-Wizards entities. And so, a little bit of a cautionary tale here around that.
Yeah. I mean, while it's not to this extent, as an organized play administrator over the years, we have had times where we have made rulings to say you can't take this, you can't do this. And often it wasn't even noticed by Wizards, but there have been times when Wizards has stepped in and said, no, you have to use everything from this book in this campaign. And there's not $100 million or $150 million at stake, but there is sales at stake, I would say. And so it is this interesting juxtaposition of a wanting a game to work well versus wanting not to curtail the sale of the game or hurt the game financially.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So I wanted to talk about it just because it is such an interesting something you don't really think about, but these kinds of effects are kind of out there even for the D&D side. Yeah.
Gamehole Publishing is going to be launching a Wardens of the Eastern Marches organized play campaign. And we were getting ready to talk about this in the news, and then we decided, hey, our friend Alex Kammer, who is the principal at Gamehole Publishing, why don't we just bring him on and talk about it? So our next segment will be an interview with Alex Kammer about this new organized play campaign that they're planning, plus some talk about Gamehole Con, which happens next week. So check out that for more information. What else is in the news? Castle floor plans. Tell me about this.
It's a really cool website that at great-castles.com gathers real-life castle floor plans of castles across the UK, France, and Germany. I've been to a few of these. They're great castles in real life, and it's really cool to see their floor plans and kind of compare them and think through. So it's a nice resource for those of you out there who maybe want to have a few castles and make them feel a little more realistic, or use something real as your basis and then fantasy it up. Kind of cool.
Great. And since Mike Shea is so kind in sponsoring our sports segments, we wanted to share some things that he's been doing. He has, believe it or not, a blog, and his latest blog post talks about the best LLM, large language model, for generating RPG stuff. It's your brain. Ooh. So what does Mike talk about here?
Yeah, he covers the huge problems of LLMs being built on stolen intellectual capital, enormous and increasing energy and water consumption for simple queries, displacing workers, and generally encrapifying the internet. And he reminds us that our brains have this ability to come up with amazing ideas, and that going through the process of generating those ideas makes us increasingly better without large water and energy consumption other than your normal diet. He provides a number of exercises and ways to promote good thinking for DMs, and it's just a nice general article, so we wanted to highlight that. Link in our show notes.
I am going to be checking this out for my class to help inspire some thinking when we get to certain parts of our class. So thank you, Mike, for sharing that. And on our creator corner, a couple of things. We see the Sorcerer's Return, a DCC adventure zine. Mystery and intrigue await in this grimdark Dungeon Crawl Classics zine for first level characters. Who has created this? Friend of the show and supporter Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com has this project, providing a complete level 1 Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure for just $10. And what do you get in this adventure, Teos?
Ooh, the village of Betrug, peopled with 16 NPCs, 5 fun new weapons, 8 new magic items, he says, of questionable utility, which I really appreciate, 2 new monsters, and 50 plus pages of horror intrigue. This project, Shawn, ends October 31st. It's more than halfway funded, so that does mean you can help it get it over the finishing line, and we've got plenty of time to do that. So check it out at Kickstarter.com, search for Sorcerer's Return.
Awesome. And I want to give everybody a big thank you for supporting the Grimhollow Transformed Kickstarter. We went live just 6 days ago as of this recording, and we are just a scooch away from $500,000. So from the bottom of my heart and the top of my hat, I thank you. What do you get with this Kickstarter? You can get a campaign guide that talks all about Grimhollow, digs down into each region, talk about how to run a dark fantasy campaign and variant rules to bring that dark fantasy feel to your campaigns, new magic items, curses, and monsters that are created by curses, or you can get the player's guide and/or where we have a new heritage system for building your characters, new classes, subclasses, spells, backgrounds, feats, special equipment, all of that. 5 or possibly more adventures that each take place in one of the main regions. And then you can also choose, if you like virtual tabletop support, all the usual suspects plus D&D Beyond as your support for the virtual tabletop. So you can buy the version that will be on D&D Beyond through the Kickstarter. And like I said, thank you so much, everybody, for your support so far.
And is this campaign guide a complete campaign setting, Shawn?
It is a very, very complete campaign setting as I read through, edit, and develop thousands, tens of thousands of words for the regions, for how to play a dark fantasy campaign, etc., etc. So yes, I would say it's about as complete as you can get.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. And now we are off to our main topic, which is our talk with Alex Kammer.